Okay, now that we know how we get possible ions in order to get electricity inside our body, we need to understand a couple of very important concepts. The first one is going to be the resting membrane potential. Next one is going to be the depolarization. Another one is going to be repolarization. And the last one is going to be action potential. Like this figure here is the electrical activity that happens at the level of your muscles. When the cell is at rest, resting membrane potential, the voltage inside your cell is going to be negative 70 millivolts. What happens? Sodium goes inside the cell, therefore the cell becomes positive. All the way up to positive 30. How do you call this part of the curve going up? Depolarization. Then what happens when it's all the way up in here? It will go down back again to negative 70. How do you achieve that? By removing potassium from the cell, because the potassium is also positive. How do you call this part of the curve when potassium goes down? That's going to be repolarization. Therefore, what is depolarization and repolarization? That's what the action potential is. Once this is completed, then your muscle is going to move. So the next topic is behavior of skeletal muscle fibers. So here comes the stimulus from the brain using a nerve. It reaches the end of the nerve. And then what the nerve is going to do is going to release acetylcholine inside the synaptic cleft. Acetylcholine will diffuse through the synaptic cleft, and it is going to reach these purple receptors that you have here, which are going to be receptors for acetylcholine, and these receptors are going to be located in the muscle. What happens with acetylcholine when it attaches to the receptor? It opens channels for sodium. As you can see here, open channels for sodium. Potassium also starts flowing out, but the amount of potassium that flows out is very minimal. So then the main concept is that sodium actually goes inside the cell. So then once the sodium starts going inside, that activates even more channels, and more sodium goes inside. So what happens when the sodium starts going inside the cell? The voltage inside your cell starts changing. We said it goes from negative into positive. So then this positivity is transmitted right here inside the cell through the three tubules. These arrows are showing you the electrical activity, how it's being transferred inside the muscle cell. This electrical positivity that happens inside your cell is going to activate the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum into the muscle. What happens when the calcium gets released into the muscle? Calcium is going to attach to troponin. Troponin activates tropomyosin. Tropomyosin slides down, and it makes the active sites available for myosin. Now, myosin, in the presence of ATP, is going to attach to the active site. As you can see here, you see ATP plus phosphorus is going to give you, obviously, ATP. Once this is attached, then this will recall back, as you can see right here, therefore moving the actin, and that's what's going to cause the sliding filament mechanism theory, which explains how the muscle actually contracts. One step after that you need to understand that the actin and the myosin will get separated again in order to initiate the contraction later on, but then this separation happens because of the presence of ATP. So the sliding filament mechanism explains how the calcium triggers the entire mechanism to contract the muscle. However, you contract the muscle due to the fact that there is an action potential from this point to this point right here. Okay, and the action potential, as we said, is going to be depolarization and repolarization. Depolarization happens because sodium goes inside the cell. Repolarization happens because potassium goes outside the cell. One very important concept to understand is the sodium-potassium pump. If you think about it, if all the sodium goes inside the cell, eventually the cell will run out of sodium to go in. If the potassium goes out of the cell, then eventually the cell will run out of potassium to go outside the cell. So then how come you reestablish this potassium back in here, and how you take out the sodium from inside the cell? That's when the sodium-potassium pump works. So the sodium goes in, but the sodium-potassium pump pumps the sodium back out. The potassium goes out, but the sodium-potassium pump pumps the potassium back in, therefore reestablishing the potential necessary for this process to happen over and over again.